Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Wednesday, August 20th, 2025, and on Wednesdays we talk about emotional well-being and relationships. And the theme of the vlog series this week is deference. And so I'm going to be talking about partner deference today. But let's be honest, who's the most important person in your life? Who's at the center of your universe? Well, it's you. Right? In other words, we're all sort of at the center of our social universes, and we kind of look out from there, from our privileged perch, if you will, at the center of our universes. And so, from a psychological perspective, let's call ourselves ego. We all have an ego, right? And if that by that we mean the part of the mind then that mediates between our conscious and unconscious being, as well as our personal identity. Okay? And without an ego, we don't exist, at least as ourselves. But of course, there's also another part of our ego, as when we talk about people having an inflated ego or an inflated sense of self-importance. And that's the part of the ego that can sort of get us into trouble at times, and especially in the social world. Why? Because we don't exist alone in our universes. We exist necessarily with a great many others. And we're immersed then in different kinds of social networks with all kinds of different relationships. So we think of many of our relationships as partnerships, both in our personal and our professional lives. But the most obvious partner would be the one that many of us have with our significant other, or our spouse, or simply what we call, whom we refer to as our partner. So in most cases, hopefully, we love our partners, perhaps in a special way or as our life partners. And they're also, of course, in that most intimate zone or circle in our universes, right? They're right there with us in many respects. So we share a lot of space together, both physically and psychologically, or even spiritually as well. But of course, that's also where problems can arise too, because sometimes it gets crowded in that metaphorical space together, especially if our egos get too inflated or we have such a strong sense of self that we don't provide sufficient space for our partners. And that's what we mean, I think, when we talk about some people talk about being in a suffocating relationship, or if we say we can't breathe in the relationship. So there's the challenge, or one of the challenges that we have in a nutshell. So how do we create enough space to allow our partners to breathe, to spread their wings, to allow for their optimal health and happiness, especially since we, as ego, have our own needs and desires and need our own space. So the poet Gibran suggested the following, taken from his classic work, The Prophet. And I just want to read this little piece from The Prophet. Maybe you've heard this or maybe you've read it yourselves. So in The Prophet, Gibran writes, "Then Almitra spoke again and said, 'And what of marriage, master?' And he answered, saying, 'You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. Aye, you shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow." Okay, so that's such a lovely and inspirational poetic passage. I hope you will agree. And that leads me then to the key point for today's vlog as regards our partners and even our children, and the concept of deference. Okay, so in my experience, if we let ego, meaning ourselves, fill up too much of the space, we're creating a problem for our partner and probably anyone else in our social sphere, in our network, in our circle. So we need our egos, though, to survive. As mentioned, without an ego, we no longer exist. So I don't think we should submerge or let go of our egos completely. But what can we do? Well, we can have less ego, and especially by showing deference to others, and especially to our partners. A humble respect toward them for who they are, for their perspectives, for their knowledge and wisdom. And yes, even if and when, especially when we have disagreements. It's not that they're always right either, for they, like ourselves, may be operating at times from too strong a sense of their own egos and importance. And so we all have to navigate these unseen psychodynamic forces in ourselves and in our relationships with others. So what I'm talking about, though, is the self-conscious decision then to consider the situation, the circumstances at hand, and give credit to the other person, to the partner, for their expertise, for their experience as well. Okay? That doesn't mean that we should be always self-effacing and discount our own expertise, our own experiences. I'm just suggesting that a key to emotional health and well-being in a healthy relationship with our partners and others involves showing them deference at times. It's a bit counterintuitive in the sense that we all like to talk about how everything's equal in our relationships. We share everything. Everything's 50-50 and so on, right? But maybe that's true in some grand philosophical sense, but as a practical matter, that's just simply not true. There are countless areas where we differ from our partners and we bring different kinds of expertise and experience and contribute in different ways, more in some areas, less in others. Think about it. One person often makes more money than another. One works more than the other or has more jobs. One plans more joint activities than the other does. One has more friends or family members that they bring into the fold, invite for a visit or what have you. One looks after the bills, perhaps, and a million other things. Okay? And of course, over the course of normal relationships, sometimes we find ourselves disagreeing or having conflicts about this or that, or who's doing what, or who's not doing enough in a certain area. Or maybe it's about a big change that you're planning that's going to obviously and directly affect the relationship, or one's job, or where to live, and so on. In fact, I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but my wife and I had a big disagreement about whether to add an extension in the house. And she was avidly in favor of doing that, and I disagreed. I thought we had enough space, and would it be worth the cost, and so on. So you might hear a saw going in the background. I'm not sure what's going to show up on this vlog or not. Okay, but the point is that I ended up in this case deferring to her. We went along with her suggestion. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff then that's going to come up in relationships where we each have our own perspectives, our own knowledge, and yes, our own expertise and experience. And we bring that to the relationship and to the disagreement, whatever that might be. But we also bring our own egos into the discussion as well. And so that's my main message. I'm suggesting that when you find yourself in a partnership of any kind, and you're having a real disagreement about an important issue, then don't just focus on your 3 E's. That is your expertise, your experience, and your ego. In other words, try to shrink the last of the 3 E's, your ego, and convey some deference to your partner. You love them, and after all, I mean, ideally you love them. And there's a great many reasons why that's the case. So shrink your ego at least a little bit to allow for more space, for more ideas, for more of what your partner has to bring to the conversation. You don't have to do all the talking. You don't have to be right all the time, but especially if and when it's driven by your own ego. And here's what I really learned. Sometimes I'll be having a disagreement with my wife, and I'm almost certain, at least at that moment, that she's wrong. She's wrong about something. And yet, as I back off, or if I allow time to pass and I allow for some reflection, or if I set aside my own ego to a certain degree, I'll often reach a different conclusion, maybe than I had at that moment or in the heat of the argument. Okay? And so, and and by the way, one of the things that I've learned to do much better is to back off in the context of an argument. I don't just turn away and say, you're right, I'm wrong, and I try not to be flippant or dismissive in that regard, but I definitely do a better job of backing off and allowing for more space to emerge, shall we say. But what's most remarkable of all, if I'm able to see my partner's perspective, okay, and even go along with their conclusions and recommendations, guess what? And I'm not, this is the truth. I'm almost always glad that I ended up going along with her suggestions, much like you might hear some hammering now too, much like the extension that's being, I was opposed to this idea. I said, there's no way, we have enough house, the kids have moved out, etc. But now we're 2/3 of the way through, and I'm loving this extension. And so, in effect, my wife was 100% right in her recommendations. Okay, and so yeah, I find that in general, in fact, listen, I'm not kidding. I'm almost always glad that I end up going along with her suggestions. Okay, I'd say at least 9 times out of 10. And that's a pretty doggone high percentage, right? So why not play the odds? So, well, Dr. J, are you saying then that you defer to your partner because she's right 90% of the time? And by implication, does that mean you're so stupid that you're wrong 90% of the time? No. The reason is that there's often no one best decision to life's big questions, to the big issues. Instead, there are often many good answers, many good decisions and paths or possible paths that one could follow forward. So you yourself, each of us has more than one good answer, and so does your partner. Okay? And so by deferring to your partner in many of these sort of open-ended issues where there's no one perfect answer, you're going to almost always end up being happy because things will happen, things will change, and most of the time things work out and you'll enjoy them together. Okay? And so I'll summarize the key point with the following anecdote, okay? Or at least imagine a hypothetical. Imagine that you're taking a nice long walk in the park or in the woods or in nature with your partner, okay? And so when you're doing that, there's no one path, single path, or the right way that you should follow. So you can discuss your options, and you typically do. Oh, let's go here. Oh, let's go there. And you can choose almost any path. And whatever path that you or your partner chooses was almost certainly going to be a good one, because it's still going to lead you into nature. You're going to enjoy your time together. You're going to see different scenery if we went this way or if we went that way, of course. But the point is that it'll still be beautiful. You're going to encounter all kinds of pleasantries and unexpected things and happenings and joys along the way. And you don't even necessarily know what they're going to be. And again, all of that's going to happen whether you go with your suggestion at time 1 or your partner's suggestion at time 1. And then you'll come to another fork in the road along the way. And once again, you're going to choose, or your partner's going to choose, and it'll almost still always be a good path. And so that's the nature of life's journey. So in many cases, and actually in most cases, I found that there's more than one path forward, and that many of the paths will end up being incredibly fruitful and interesting and fulfilling and so much more. So to enhance your health and well-being of yourself and of your relationships, I think it's wise then to show deference and let our partners lead. And they should, of course, do that from time to time and let us lead. But the chances are that we're both going to make a great decision. You have to trust each other, right? You should. I mean, that's kind of foundational to the relationship. And the outcomes are almost always going to be good ones and life enhancing ones. So why not just show deference then and go with the flow? And besides, if it ends up being a bad decision, you're off the hook. You can just sort of blame the other person. See, I knew we shouldn't have followed those tracks and those droppings into the woods because now we're standing clearly in the den of a bear. Okay? And by the way, that bear looks really hungry. Okay? So, but you didn't listen to me, and now here we are, and, oh, no, okay. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. But hopefully that, of course, doesn't happen. But that's the final point. Once in a while, yeah, we'll defer to our partner, or vice versa, and it won't work out. Doesn't always work out great, right? But that's okay too, because that's only about 10% of the time, by my math, right? So again, most of the decisions, most of the time, should work out. But once in a while, it's not. But the point is you don't have to blame your partner or or yourself for the one time out of 10 that things don't work out. That's life. In fact, the best thing we can do then, of course, is learn from the mistake, from that particular choice, and ideally even learn to laugh it off in time. Oh, that didn't work out so well, right? And then that becomes part of your collective memory. And you can laugh about the experience for the rest of your lives, hopefully. Tell the stories. Turn the negative into a long-term learning experience and even a positive. Okay, so I'll just close with a couple more big examples in my own life where setting my ego aside and, again, extending deference then to my wife paid off big time. So I deferred to her, for example, for the bulk of our wedding preparations and planning and so on. And that turned out spectacular. Okay? I deferred to her for many of the key decisions about where and how to raise our children and where we should be devoting our time and energy. And that turned out spectacular. And now we have 5 wonderful young men who are 5 brothers who love each other and who are, part of the world's solution. There are many different decisions that we could have made along the way, but I deferred in many instances to my wife's wisdom and her experience and her background, etc. And again, most of the time that worked out great, especially with the boys. And then I deferred to her for this in terms of this idea. Well, actually, it was a sort of a shared decision. I sort of arrived at the same decision she did. And remember, oftentimes we're in total agreement. So that's great. So yeah, in those cases, you don't really have to worry about it. Maybe you have to worry about groupthink. Maybe you should step outside and say, oh, should we do this? Have we considered all the possibilities? But anyway, yeah, when you're in agreement, oftentimes that's great. Okay. But anyway, what I wanted to say is I deferred to her because it was really her. She came up with the suggestion first to have her mother come live with us permanently. And that turned out spectacular. What? You live with your mother-in-law? Yeah. But again, with the right context and the right discussion and supports, etc., of course it can work out. But then a couple of years ago, I deferred to her again with this idea of buying this huge decision of buying a condo across the street from where we currently live, to give her a bit more space and give us a chance, to sort of go back and forth. And so anyway, the point of it is it cost a fair bit of money. I wasn't sure that this was a good idea. We ain't rich, and I'm definitely not rich. My friend Rich, he's very rich. But you guessed it. That turned out spectacular too. So I could go on. And again, like with this health extension, but almost every time we've had to make a huge decision and we've maybe had some real differences of opinion, different directions we could go, etc. I've often deferred to my wife. And it's almost always turned out, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh yeah, spectacular. Okay? So, and that's largely because, again, most of the pathways are pretty darn good ones, or even great ones. So why not shrink the ego a little bit and defer to your partner? You'll almost always be glad that you did. And in a healthy relationship, Hopefully, they'll do the same from time to time, and they'll be happy. Okay? All right. So sorry for the long one. I hope this really helps, though. As ever, in the meantime, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And may you enjoy your journey and every sandwich along the way in whatever path you might choose, or defer to your partner. You'll probably still love the decision and love the outcome. All right. Hopefully, we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.